Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
Chapter 14. Mrs. Ackroyd. After the evening talk I have just chronicled, the affair seemed to me to enter on a different phase. The whole thing can be divided into two parts, each clear and distinct from the other. Part I ranges from Ackroyd's death on the Friday evening to the following Monday night. It is the straightforward narrative of what occurred, as presented to Hercule Poirot. I was at Poirot's elbow the whole time. I saw what he saw. I tried my best to read his mind. As I know now, I failed in this latter task. Though Poirot showed me all his discoveries, as for instance the gold wedding ring, he held back the vital and yet logical impressions that he formed. As I came to know later, this secrecy was characteristic of him. He would throw out hints and suggestions, but beyond that he would not go. As I say, up till the Monday evening, my narrative might have been that of Poirot himself. I played Watson to his Sherlock. But after Monday our ways diverged. Poirot was busy on his own account. I got to hear of what he was doing, because in King's Abbot you get to hear of everything, but he did not take me into his confidence beforehand. And I too had my own preoccupations. On looking back, the thing that strikes me most is the piecemeal character of this period. Everyone had a hand in the elucidation of the mystery. It was rather like a jigsaw puzzle to which everyone contributed their own little piece of knowledge or discovery. But their task ended there. To Poirot alone belongs the renown of fitting those pieces into their correct place. Some of the incidents seemed at the time irrelevant and unmeaning. There was, for instance, the question of the black boots. But that comes later. To take things strictly in chronological order, I must begin with the summons from Mrs. Ackroyd. She sent for me early on Tuesday morning, and since the summons sounded an urgent one, I hastened there, expecting to find her in extremis. The lady was in bed. So much did she concede to the etiquette of the situation. She gave me her bony hand and indicated a chair drawn up to the bedside. "Well, Mrs. Ackroyd," I said, "and what's the matter with you?" I spoke with that kind of spurious geniality which seems to be expected of general practitioners. "I'm prostrated," said Mrs. Ackroyd in a faint voice. "Absolutely prostrated. It's the shock of poor Roger's death. They say these things often aren't felt at the time, you know. It's the reaction afterwards. It is a pity that a doctor is precluded by his profession from being able, sometimes, to say what he really thinks. I would have given anything to be able to answer bunkum. Instead, I suggested a tonic. Mrs. Ackroyd accepted the tonic. One move in the game seemed now to be concluded. Not for a moment did I imagine that I had been sent for because of the shock occasioned by Ackroyd's death. But Mrs. Ackroyd is totally incapable of pursuing a straightforward course on any subject. She always approaches her object by tortuous means. I wondered very much why it was she had sent for me. "And then that scene yesterday," continued my patient. She paused as though expecting me to take up a cue. "What scene?" "Doctor, have you forgotten? That dreadful little Frenchman or Belgian or whatever he is. Bullying us all like he did. It has quite upset me. Coming on top of Roger's death." "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Ackroyd," I said. "I don't know what he meant, shouting at us like he did. I should hope I know my duty too well to dream of concealing anything. I have given the police every assistance in my power." Mrs. Ackroyd paused and I said, "Quite so. I was beginning to have a glimmering of what all the trouble was about. No one can say that I have failed in my duty, continued Mrs. Ackroyd. I am sure Inspector Raglan is perfectly satisfied. Why should this little upstart of a foreigner make a fuss? A most ridiculous-looking creature he is too, just like a comic Frenchman in a review. I can't think why Flora insisted on bringing him into the case. She never said a word to me about it. Just went off and did it on her own. Flora is too independent. I am a woman of the world and her mother. She should have come to me for advice first. But I listened to all this in silence. What does he think? That's what I want to know. Does he actually imagine I'm hiding something? He positively accused me yesterday. But I shrugged my shoulders. It is surely of no consequence, Mrs. Ackroyd, I said. Since you are not concealing anything, any remarks he may have made do not apply to you. But Mrs. Ackroyd went off at a tangent, after her usual fashion. Servants are so tiresome, she said. They gossip and talk amongst themselves. And then it gets round, and all the time there's probably nothing in it at all. But have the servants been talking? I asked. What about? Mrs. Ackroyd cast a very shrewd glance at me. It quite threw me off my balance. I was sure you'd know, Doctor, if anyone did. You were with Poirot all the time, weren't you? I was. But then of course you know. It was that girl Ursula Bourne, wasn't it? Naturally, she's leaving. She would want to make all the trouble she could. Spiteful, that's what they are. They're all alike. Now you being there, Doctor, you must know exactly what she did say. I'm most anxious that no wrong impression should get about. After all, you don't repeat every little detail to the police, do you? There are family matters sometimes, nothing to do with the question of the murder. But if the girl was spiteful, she may have made out all sorts of things. But I was shrewd enough to see that a very real anxiety lay behind these outpourings. Poirot had been justified in his premises. Of the 6 people round the table yesterday, Mrs. Ackroyd at least had had something to hide. It was for me to discover what that something might be. If I were you, Mrs. Ackroyd, I said brusquely, I should make a clean breast of things. But she gave a little scream. Oh, Doctor, how can you be so abrupt? It sounds as though, and I can explain everything so simply. But then why not do so, I suggested. Mrs. Ackroyd took out a frilled handkerchief and became tearful. I thought, Doctor, that you might put it to Poirot, explain it, you know, because it's so difficult for a foreigner to see our point of view. And you don't know, nobody could know, what I've had to contend with. A martyrdom, a long martyrdom. That's what my life has been. I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but there it is. Not the smallest bill, but it had all to be gone over, just as though Roger had had a few miserly hundreds a year instead of being, as Mr. Hammond told me yesterday, one of the wealthiest men in these parts. But Mrs. Ackroyd paused to dab her eyes with the frilled handkerchief. Yes, I said encouragingly. You were talking about bills. Those dreadful bills. And some I didn't like to show Roger at all. They were things a man wouldn't understand. He would have said the things were necessary. And of course they mounted up, you know, and they kept coming in. She looked at me appealingly, as though asking me to condole with her on this striking peculiarity. It's a habit they have, I agreed. And the tone altered, became quite abusive. I assure you, Doctor, I was becoming a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep at nights. And a dreadful fluttering round the heart. And then I got a letter from a Scotch gentleman, As a matter of fact, there were 2 letters, both Scotch gentlemen. Mr. Bruce Macpherson was one, and the other were Colin MacDonald. Quite a coincidence. Hardly that, I said dryly. They are usually Scotch gentlemen, but I suspect a Semitic strain in their ancestry. £10 to 10,000 on note of hand alone, murmured Mrs. Ackroyd reminiscently. I wrote to one of them, but it seemed there were difficulties. She paused. I gathered that we were just coming to delicate ground. I have never known anyone more difficult to bring to the point. You see, murmured Mrs. Ackroyd, it's all a question of expectations, isn't it? Testamentary expectations. And though, of course, I expected that Roger would provide for me, I did know. I thought that if only I could glance over a copy of his will, not in any sense of vulgar prying, but just so that I could make my own arrangements. She glanced sideways at me. The position was now very delicate indeed. Fortunately, words ingeniously used will serve to mask the ugliness of naked facts. I could only tell this to you, dear doctor. Shepherd, said Mrs. Ackroyd rapidly. I can trust you not to misjudge me, and to represent the matter in the right light to M. Poirot. It was on Friday afternoon. She came to a stop and swallowed uncertainly. Yes, I repeated encouragingly. On Friday afternoon. Well, everyone was out, or so I thought. And I went into Roger's study. I had some real reason for going there. I mean, there was nothing underhand about it. And as I saw all the papers heaped on the desk, it just came to me like a flash. I wonder if Roger keeps his will in one of the drawers of the desk. I'm so impulsive, always was from a child. I do things on the spur of the moment. He'd left his keys, very careless of him, in the lock of the top drawer. I see, I said helpfully. So you searched the desk. Did you find the will? Mrs. Ackroyd gave a little scream, and I realized that I had not been sufficiently diplomatic. How dreadful it sounds. But it wasn't at all like that, really. Of course it wasn't, I said hastily. You must forgive my unfortunate way of putting things. You see, men are so peculiar. In dear Roger's place, I should not have objected to revealing the provisions of my will. But men are so secretive. One is forced to adopt little subterfuges in self-defense. And the result of the little subterfuge, I asked. That's just what I'm telling you. As I got to the bottom drawer, Bourne came. Most awkward. Of course, I shut the drawer and stood up, and I called her attention to a few specks of dust on the surface. But I didn't like the way she looked, quite respectful in manner, but a very nasty light in her eyes. Almost contemptuous, if you know what I mean. I never have liked that girl very much. She's a good servant, and she says ma'am, and doesn't object to wearing caps and aprons, which I declare to you a lot of them do nowadays, and she can say, not at home, without scruples if she has to answer the door instead of Parker, and she doesn't have those peculiar gurgling noises inside which so many parlour maids seem to have when they wait at table. Let me see, where was I? You were saying that in spite of several valuable qualities, you never liked No more I do's. She's odd. There's something different about her from the others. Too well educated, that's my opinion. You can't tell who are ladies and who aren't nowadays. And what happened next? I asked. Nothing. At least Roger came in. And I thought he was out for a walk. And he said, "What's all this?" And I said, "Nothing. I just came in to fetch Punch." And I took Punch and went out with it. Bourne stayed behind. I heard her asking Roger if she could speak to him for a minute. I went straight up to my room to lie down. I was very upset. There was a pause. You will explain to M. Poirot, won't you? You can see for yourself what a trivial matter the whole thing was. But of course, when he was so stern about concealing things, I thought of this at once. Bourne may have made some extraordinary story out of it, but you can explain, can't you? That is all, I said. You have told me everything. Yes, said Mrs. Ackroyd. Oh, yes, she added firmly. But I had noted the momentary hesitation, and I knew that there was still something she was keeping back. It was nothing less than a flash of sheer genius that prompted me to ask the question I did. Mrs. Ackroyd, I said, was it you who left the silver table open? I had my answer in the blush of guilt that even rouge and powder could not conceal. How did you know? She whispered. It was you then. Yes, you see, there were 1 or 2 pieces of old silver, very interesting. I had been reading up the subject, and there was an illustration of quite a small piece, which had fetched an immense sum at Christie's. It looked to me just the same as the one in the silver table. I thought I would take it up to London with me when I went, and have it valued. Then, if it really was a valuable piece, just think what a charming surprise it would have been for Roger. I refrained from comments, accepting Mrs. Ackroyd's story on its merits. I even forbore to ask her why it was necessary to abstract what she wanted in such a surreptitious manner. Why did you leave the lid open? I asked. Did you forget? I was startled, said Mrs. Ackroyd. I heard footsteps coming along the terrace outside. I hastened out of the room and just got up the stairs before Parker opened the front door to you. That must have been Miss Russell, I said thoughtfully. Mrs. Ackroyd had revealed to me one fact that was extremely interesting. Whether her designs upon Ackroyd's silver had been strictly honourable, I neither knew nor cared. What did interest me was the fact that Miss Russell must have entered the drawing-room by the window, and that I had not been wrong when I judged her to be out of breath with running. Where had she been? I thought of the summer house and the scrap of cambric. I wonder if Miss Russell has her handkerchief starched, I exclaimed on the spur of the moment. Mrs. Ackroyd's start recalled me to myself, and I rose. You think you can explain to M. Poirot, she asked anxiously. Oh, certainly. Absolutely. I got away at last, after being forced to listen to more justifications of her conduct. The parlour maid was in the hall, and it was she who helped me on with my overcoat. I observed her more closely than I had done heretofore. It was clear that she had been crying. How is it, I asked, that you told us that Mr. Ackroyd sent for you on Friday to his study? I hear now that it was you who asked to speak to him. For a minute the girl's eyes dropped before mine. Then she spoke. I meant to leave in any case, she said uncertainly. I said no more. She opened the front door for me. Just as I was passing out, she said suddenly in a low voice, Excuse me, sir, is there any news of Captain Patterne? I shook my head, looking at her inquiringly. He ought to come back, she said. Indeed, he ought to come back. She was looking at me with appealing eyes. Does no one know where he is? She asked. Do you? I said sharply. She shook her head. No, indeed. I know nothing. But anyone who was a friend to him would tell him this. He ought to come back. I lingered, thinking that perhaps the girl would say more. Her next question surprised me. When do they think the murder was done? Just before 10 o'clock. That is the idea, I said. Between 9:45 and the hour. Not earlier, not before 9:45. I looked at her attentively. She was so clearly eager for a reply in the affirmative. "That's out of the question," I said. "Miss Ackroyd saw her uncle alive at 9:45. She turned away, and her whole figure seemed to droop. "A handsome girl," I said to myself as I drove off. "An exceedingly handsome girl." Caroline was at home. She had had a visit from Poirot, and was very pleased and important about it. "I am helping him with the case," she explained. I felt rather uneasy. Caroline is bad enough as it is. What will she be like with her detective instincts encouraged? "Are you going round the neighbourhood looking for Ralph Patton's mysterious girl?" I inquired. "I might do that on my own account," said Caroline. "No, this is a special thing, Em. Poirot wants me to find out for him." What is it?" I asked. "He wants to know whether Ralph Patton's boots were black or brown," said Caroline with tremendous solemnity. I stared at her. I see now that I was unbelievably stupid about these boots. I failed altogether to grasp the point. "They were brown shoes," I said. "I saw them." "Not shoes, James, boots." Poirot wants to know whether a pair of boots Ralph had with him at the hotel were brown or black. A lot hangs on it. Call me dense if you like. I didn't see." "And how are you going to find out?" I asked. Caroline said there would be no difficulty about that. Our Annie's dearest friend was Miss Gannet's maid, Clara. And Clara was walking out with the boots at the Three Boars. The whole thing was simplicity itself, and by the aid of Miss Gannet, who cooperated loyally, at once giving Clara leave of absence, the matter was rushed through at express speed. It was when we were sitting down to lunch that Caroline remarked, with would-be unconcern, "About those boots of Ralph Patton's." "Well," I said, "what about them?" Poirot thought they were probably brown. He was wrong. They're black." And Caroline nodded her head several times. She evidently felt that she had scored a point over Poirot. I did not answer. I was puzzling over what the colour of a pair of Ralph Patton's boots had to do with the case. Chapter 15. Geoffrey Raymond. I was to have a further proof that day of the success of Poirot's tactics. That challenge of his had been a subtle touch born of his knowledge of human nature. A mixture of fear and guilt had wrung the truth from Mrs. Ackroyd. She was the first to react. That afternoon when I returned from seeing my patients, Caroline told me that Geoffrey Raymond had just left. "Did he want to see me?" I asked as I hung up my coat in the hall. Caroline was hovering by my elbow. "It was Poirot he wanted to see," she said. "He'd just come from the Larches." Poirot was out. "Mr. Raymond thought that he might be here, or that you might know where he was." "I haven't the least idea." "I tried to make him wait," said Caroline, "but he said he would call back at the Larches in half an hour and went away down the village. A great pity because Poirot came in practically the minute after he left." "Came in here?" "No, to his own house." "How do you know?" "The side window," said Caroline briefly. It seemed to me that we had now exhausted the topic. Caroline thought otherwise. "Aren't you going across?" "Across where?" "To the Larches, of course." "My dear Caroline," I said, "what for?" "Mr. Raymond wanted to see him very particularly," said Caroline. "You might hear what it's all about." I raised my eyebrows. "Curiosity is not my besetting sin," I remarked coldly. "I can exist comfortably without knowing exactly what my neighbours are doing and thinking. Stuff and nonsense, James, said my sister. You want to know just as much as I do. You're not so honest, that's all. You always have to pretend. Really, Caroline, I said, and retired into my surgery. 10 minutes later, Caroline tapped at the door and entered. In her hand, she held what seemed to be a pot of jam. I wonder, James, she said, if you would mind taking this pot of medlar jelly across to M. Poirot, I promised it to him. He has never tasted any homemade medlar jelly. Why can't Annie go? I asked coldly. She's doing some mending. I can't spare her. Caroline and I looked at each other. Very well, I said, rising. But if I take the beastly thing, I shall just leave it at the door. You understand that? My sister raised her eyebrows. Naturally, she said. Who suggested you should do anything else? The honours were with Caroline. If you do happen to see M. Poirot, she said as I opened the front door, you might tell him about the boots. It was a most subtle parting shot. I wanted dreadfully to understand the enigma of the boots. When the old lady with the Breton cap opened the door to me, I found myself asking if M. Poirot was in quite automatically. Poirot sprang up to meet me, with every appearance of pleasure. Sit down, my good friend, he said. The big chair, this small one, the room is not too hot, no. I thought it was stifling, but refrained from saying so. The windows were closed, and a large fire burned in the grate. The English people, they have a mania for the fresh air, declared Poirot. The big air, it is all very well outside, where it belongs. Why admit it to the house, but let us not discuss such banalities. You have something for me, yes. 2 things, I said. First, this from my sister. I handed over the pot of medlar jelly. How kind of Mademoiselle Caroline. She has remembered her promise. And the second thing. Information of a kind. And I told him of my interview with Mrs. Ackroyd. He listened with interest, but not much excitement. It clears the ground, he said thoughtfully. And it has a certain value as confirming the evidence of the housekeeper. She said, you remember, that she found the silver table lid open and closed it down in passing. What about her statement that she went into the drawing-room to see if the flowers were fresh? We never took that very seriously, did we, my friend? It was patently an excuse trumped up in a hurry by a woman who felt it urgent to explain her presence, which, by the way, you would probably never have thought of questioning. I considered it possible that her agitation might arise from the fact that she had been tampering with the silver table, but I think now that we must look for another cause. Yes, I said. Whom did she go out to meet, and why? You think she went to meet someone. I do. Poirot nodded. So do I, he said thoughtfully. There was a pause. By the way, I said, I've got a message for you from my sister. Ralph Patton's boots were black, not brown. I was watching him closely as I gave the message, and I fancied that I saw a momentary flicker of discomposure. If so, it passed almost immediately. She is absolutely positive they are not brown. Absolutely. Said Poirot regretfully. That is a pity. And he seemed quite crestfallen. He entered into no explanations, but at once started a new subject of conversation. The housekeeper, Miss Russell, who came to consult you on that Friday morning, is it indiscreet to ask what passed at the interview, apart from the medical details, I mean? Not at all, I said. When the professional part of the conversation was over, We talked for a few minutes about poisons, and the ease or difficulty of detecting them, and about drug taking and drug takers. With special reference to cocaine, asked Poirot. How did you know? I asked, somewhat surprised. For answer, the little man rose and crossed the room to where newspapers were filed. He brought me a copy of the Daily Budget, dated Friday, 16th September, and showed me an article dealing with the smuggling of cocaine. It was a somewhat lurid article, written with an eye to picturesque effect. That is what put cocaine into her head, my friend, he said. I would have catechized him further, for I did not quite understand his meaning, but at that moment the door opened and Geoffrey Raymond was announced. He came in fresh and debonair as ever, and greeted us both. How are you, Doctor M? Poirot, this is the second time I've been here this morning. I was anxious to catch you. Perhaps I'd better be off, I suggested rather awkwardly. Not on my account, Doctor. No, it's just this, he went on, seating himself at a wave of invitation from Poirot. I've got a confession to make. En vérité, said Poirot with an air of polite interest. Oh, it's of no consequence, really. But as a matter of fact, my conscience has been pricking me ever since yesterday afternoon. You accused us all of keeping back something, M. Poirot. I plead guilty. I've had something up my sleeve. And what is that, M? Raymond. As I say, it's nothing of consequence, just this. I was in debt badly, and that legacy came in the nick of time. £500 puts me on my feet again with a little to spare. He smiled at us both with that engaging frankness that made him such a likeable youngster. You know how it is. Suspicious-looking policemen don't like to admit you were hard up for money, think it will look bad to them. But I was a fool, really, because Blunt and I were in the billiard room from 9:45 onwards, so I've got a watertight alibi and nothing to fear. Still, when you thundered out that stuff about concealing things, I felt a nasty prick of conscience, and I thought I'd like to get it off my mind. He got up again and stood smiling at us. You are a very wise young man, said Poirot, nodding at him with approval. See you, when I know that anyone is hiding things from me, I suspect that the thing hidden may be something very bad indeed. You have done well. I'm glad I'm cleared from suspicion, laughed Raymond. I'll be off now. So that is that, I remarked, as the door closed behind the young secretary. Yes, agreed Poirot. A mere bagatelle, but if he had not been in the billiard room, who knows? After all, many crimes have been committed for the sake of less than £500. It all depends on what sum is sufficient to break a man. A question of the relativity, is it not so? Have you reflected, my friend, that many people in that house stood to benefit by Mr. Ackroyd's death? Mrs. Ackroyd, Miss Flora, young Mr. Raymond, the housekeeper, Miss Russell. Only one, in fact, does not, Major Blunt. His tone in uttering that name was so peculiar that I looked up, puzzled. I don't quite understand you, I said. Two of the people I accused have given me the truth. You think Major Blunt has something to conceal also? As for that, remarked Poirot nonchalantly, there is a saying, is there not, that Englishmen conceal only one thing, their love, and Major Blunt, I should say, is not good at concealments. Sometimes, I said, I wonder if we haven't rather jumped to conclusions on one point. What is that? We've assumed that the blackmailer of Mrs. Ferrars is necessarily the murderer of Mr. Ackroyd. Mightn't we be mistaken? Poirot nodded energetically. Very good indeed. I wondered if that idea would come to you. Of course it is possible. But we must remember one point. The letter disappeared. Still, that, as you say, may not necessarily mean that the murderer took it. When you first found the body, Parker may have abstracted the letter unnoticed by you. Parker. Yes, Parker. I always come back to Parker, not as the murderer. No, he did not commit the murder. But who is more suitable than he as the mysterious scoundrel who terrorized Mrs. Ferrars? He may have got his information about Mr. Ferrars's death from one of the king's paddock servants. At any rate, he is more likely to have come upon it than a casual guest such as Blunt, for instance. Parker might have taken the letter, I admitted. It wasn't till later that I noticed it was gone. How much later? After Blunt and Raymond were in the room or before? I can't remember, I said slowly. I think it was before, no, afterwards. Yes, I'm almost sure it was afterwards. That widens the field to 3, said Poirot thoughtfully. But Parker is the most likely. It is in my mind to try a little experiment with Parker. How say you, my friend, will you accompany me to Fernley? I acquiesced, and we set out at once. Poirot asked to see Miss Ackroyd, and presently Flora came to us. Mademoiselle Flora, said Poirot, I have to confide in you a little secret. I am not yet satisfied of the innocence of Parker. I propose to make a little experiment with your assistance. I want to reconstruct some of his actions on that night. But we must think of something to tell him. I have it. I wish to satisfy myself as to whether voices in the little lobby could have been heard outside on the terrace. Now ring for Parker, if you will be so good. I did so, and presently the butler appeared, suave as ever. You rang, sir. Yes, my good Parker. I have in mind a little experiment. I have placed Major Blunt on the terrace, outside the study window. I want to see if anyone there could have heard the voices of Miss Ackroyd and yourself in the lobby that night. I want to enact that little scene over again. Perhaps you would fetch the tray or whatever it was you were carrying. Parker vanished, and we repaired to the lobby outside the study door. Presently we heard a chink in the outer hall, and Parker appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with a siphon, a decanter of whisky, and 2 glasses on it. One moment, cried Poirot, raising his hand and seemingly very excited. We must have everything in order, just as it occurred. It is a little method of mine. A foreign custom, sir, said Parker. Reconstruction of the crime they call it, do they not? He was quite imperturbable, as he stood there politely waiting on Poirot's orders. He knows something, the good Parker, cried Poirot. He has read of these things. Now, I beg you, let us have everything of the most exact. You came from the outer hall, so... Mademoiselle was where? Here, said Flora, taking up her stand just outside the study door. Quite right, sir, said Parker. I had just closed the door, continued Flora. Yes, miss, agreed Parker. Your hand was still on the handle as it is now. Then allez, said Poirot. Play me the little comedy. Flora stood with her hand on the door handle, and Parker came stepping through the door from the hall, bearing the tray. He stopped just inside the door. Flora spoke. Oh, Parker. Mr. Ackroyd doesn't want to be disturbed again tonight. Is that right? She added in an undertone. To the best of my recollection, Miss Flora, said Parker, but I fancy you used the word evening instead of night. Then, raising his voice in a somewhat theatrical fashion, very good, miss. Shall I lock up as usual? Yes, please. Parker retired through the door, Flora followed him, and started to ascend the main staircase. Is that enough? She asked over her shoulder. Admirable, declared the little man, rubbing his hands. By the way, Parker, are you sure there were 2 glasses on the tray that evening? Who was the second one for? I always bring 2 glasses, sir, said Parker. Is there anything further? Nothing. I thank you. Parker withdrew, dignified to the last. Poirot stood in the middle of the hall, frowning. Flora came down and joined us. Has your experiment been successful? She asked. I don't quite understand, you know. Poirot smiled admiringly at her. It is not necessary that you should, he said. But tell me, were there indeed 2 glasses on Parker's tray that night? Flora wrinkled her brows a minute. I really can't remember, she said. I think there were. Is that the object of your experiment? Poirot took her hand and patted it. Put it this way, he said. I am always interested to see if people will speak the truth. And did Parker speak the truth? I rather think he did, said Poirot thoughtfully. A few minutes later saw us retracing our steps to the village. What was the point of that question about the glasses? I asked curiously. Poirot shrugged his shoulders. One must say something, he remarked. That particular question did as well as any other. I stared at him. At any rate, my friend, he said more seriously, I know now something I wanted to know. Let us leave it at that. Chapter 16. An evening at Mahjong. That night we had a little Mahjong party. This kind of simple entertainment is very popular in King's Abbot. The guests arrive in goloshes and waterproofs after dinner. They partake of coffee and later of cake, sandwiches and tea. On this particular night our guests were Miss Gannett and Colonel Carter, who lives near the church. A good deal of gossip is handed round at these evenings, sometimes seriously interfering with the game in progress. We used to play bridge, chatty bridge of the worst description. We find Mahjong much more peaceful. The irritated demand as to why on earth your partner did not lead a certain card is entirely done away with, and though we still express criticisms frankly, there is not the same acrimonious spirit. Very cold evening, eh, Shepherd? Said Colonel Carter, standing with his back to the fire. Caroline had taken Miss Gannett to her own room, and was there assisting her to disentangle herself from her many wraps. Reminds me of the Afghan passes. Indeed, I said politely. Very mysterious business this about poor Ackroyd, continued the Colonel, accepting a cup of coffee. A deuce of a lot behind it, that's what I say. Between you and me, Shepherd, I've heard the word blackmail mentioned. The Colonel gave me the look which might be tabulated, one man of the world to another. A woman in it, no doubt, he said. Depend upon it, a woman in it. Caroline and Miss Gannett joined us at this minute. Miss Gannett drank coffee whilst Caroline got out the Mahjong box and poured out the tiles upon the table. Washing the tiles, said the Colonel facetiously. That's right, washing the tiles, as we used to say in the Shanghai Club. It is the private opinion of both Caroline and myself that Colonel Carter has never been in the Shanghai Club in his life. More, that he has never been farther east than India, where he juggled with tins of bully beef and plum and apple jam during the Great War. But the Colonel is determinedly military, and in King's Abbot we permit people to indulge their little idiosyncrasies freely. Shall we begin? Said Caroline. We sat round the table. For some 5 minutes there was complete silence, owing to the fact that there is tremendous secret competition amongst us as to who can build their wall quickest. Go on, James, said Caroline at last. Your east wind. I discarded a tile. A round or two proceeded, broken by the monotonous remarks of 3 bamboos, 2 circles, pung, and frequently from Miss Gannett unpung, owing to that lady's habit of too hastily claiming tiles to which she had no right. "I saw Flora Ackroyd this morning," said Miss Gannett. "Pung no unpunged. I made a mistake." 4 circles," said Caroline. "Where did you see her?" "She didn't see me," said Miss Gannett, with that tremendous significance only to be met with in small villages. "Ah," said Caroline interestedly. "Chow." "I believe," said Miss Gannett, temporarily diverted, "that it's the right thing nowadays to say chi, not chow." "Nonsense," said Caroline. "I have always said chow." "In the Shanghai Club," said Colonel Carter, "they say chow." Miss Gannett retired, crushed. "What were you saying about Flora Ackroyd?" asked Caroline after a moment or two devoted to the game. "Was she with anyone?" "Very much so," said Miss Gannett. The eyes of the 2 ladies met, and seemed to exchange information. "Really?" said Caroline interestedly. "Is that it? Well, it doesn't surprise me in the least." "We're waiting for you to discard, Miss Caroline," said the Colonel. He sometimes affects the pose of the bluff male, intent on the game and indifferent to gossip. But nobody is deceived. "If you ask me," said Miss Gannett. "Was that a bamboo you discarded, dear?" "Oh no, I see now, it was a circle." "As I was saying, if you ask me, Flora's been exceedingly lucky." "Exceedingly lucky she's been." "How's that, Miss Gannett?" asked the Colonel. "I'll pung that green dragon." "How do you make out that Miss Flora's been lucky? Very charming girl and all that, I know." "I mayn't know very much about crime," said Miss Gannett with the air of one who knows everything there is to know, "but I can tell you one thing. The first question that's always asked is, who last saw the deceased alive, and the person who did is regarded with suspicion. Now, Flora Ackroyd last saw her uncle alive. It might have looked very nasty for her, very nasty indeed. It's my opinion, and I give it for what it's worth, that Ralph Patten is staying away on her account, to draw suspicion away from her." "Come now," I protested mildly. "You surely can't suggest that a young girl like Flora Ackroyd is capable of stabbing her uncle in cold blood." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Gannett. "I've just been reading a book from the library about the underworld of Paris, and it says that some of the worst women criminals are young girls with the faces of angels." "That's in France," said Caroline instantly. "Just so," said the Colonel. "Now I'll tell you a very curious thing, a story that was going round the bazaars in India." The Colonel's story was one of interminable length and of curiously little interest. A thing that happened in India many years ago cannot compare for a moment with an event that took place in King's Abbot the day before yesterday. It was Caroline who brought the Colonel's story to a close by fortunately going mahjong. After the slight unpleasantness always occasioned by my corrections of Caroline's somewhat faulty arithmetic, we started a new hand. "East wind passes," said Caroline. "I've got an idea of my own about Ralph Patten. 3 characters, but I'm keeping it to myself for the present." "Are you, dear?" said Miss Gannett. "Chow, I mean pung." "Yes," said Caroline firmly. "Was it all right about the boots?" asked Miss Gannett. "They're being black, I mean." "Quite all right," said Caroline. "What was the point, do you think?" asked Miss Gannett. Caroline pursed up her lips and shook her head with an air of knowing all about it. "Pung," said Miss Gannett. "No unpunged. I suppose that now the doctor, S in with M. Poirot, he knows all the secrets." "Far from it," I said. James is so modest, said Caroline. Ah, a concealed Kong. The Colonel gave vent to a whistle. For the moment gossip was forgotten. Your own wind too, he said. And you've got 2 pungs of dragons. We must be careful. Miss Caroline's out for a big hand. We played for some minutes with no irrelevant conversation. This Poirot now, said Colonel Carter, is he really such a great detective? The greatest the world has ever known, said Caroline solemnly. He had to come here incognito to avoid publicity. Chow, said Miss Gannett. Quite wonderful for our little village, I'm sure. By the way, Clara, my maid, you know, is great friends with Elsie, the housemaid at Fernley, and what do you think Elsie told her? That there's been a lot of money stolen, and it's her opinion, Elsie's, I mean that the parlour maid had something to do with it. She's leaving at the month, and she's crying a good deal at night. If you ask me, the girl is very likely in league with a gang. She's always been a queer girl. She's not friends with any of the girls round here. She goes off by herself on her days out. Very unnatural, I call it, and most suspicious. I asked her once to come to our girls' friendly evenings, but she refused, and then I asked her a few questions about her home and her family, all that sort of thing, and I'm bound to say I considered her manner most impertinent. Outwardly very respectful, but she shut me up in the most barefaced way. Miss Gannett stopped for breath, and the Colonel, who was totally uninterested in the servant question, remarked that in the Shanghai Club brisk play was the invariable rule. We had a round of brisk play. That Miss Russell, said Caroline. She came here pretending to consult James on Friday morning. It's my opinion she wanted to see where the poisons were kept. 5 characters. Chow, said Miss Gannett. What an extraordinary idea. I wonder if you can be right. Talking of poisons, said the Colonel. What haven't I discarded? Oh, 8 bamboos. Mahjong, said Miss Gannett. Caroline was very much annoyed. 1 red dragon, she said regretfully, and I should have had a hand of 3 doubles. I've had 2 red dragons all the time, I mentioned. So exactly like you, James, said Caroline reproachfully. You've no conception of the spirit of the game. I myself thought I had played rather cleverly. I should have had to pay Caroline an enormous amount if she had gone mahjong. Miss Gannett's mahjong was of the poorest variety possible, as Caroline did not fail to point out to her. East wind passed, and we started a new hand in silence. What I was going to tell you just now was this, said Caroline. Yes, said Miss Gannett encouragingly. My idea about Ralph Patten, I mean. Yes, dear, said Miss Gannett, still more encouragingly. Chow, it's a sign of weakness to chow so early, said Caroline severely. You should go for a big hand. I know, said Miss Gannett. You were saying about Ralph Patten, you know. Yes. Well, I've a pretty shrewd idea where he is. We all stopped to stare at her. This is very interesting, Miss Caroline, said Colonel Carter. All your own idea, eh? Well, not exactly. I'll tell you about it. You know that big map of the county we have in the hall? We all said yes. As Poirot was going out the other day, he stopped and looked at it and he made some remark. I can't remember exactly what it was. Something about Cranchester being the only big town anywhere near us, which is true, of course. But after he had gone, it came to me suddenly. What came to you? His meaning. Of course Ralph is in Cranchester. It was at that moment that I knocked down the rack that held my pieces. My sister immediately reproved me for clumsiness, but half-heartedly. She was intent on her theory. "Cranchester, Miss Caroline," said Colonel Carter. "Surely not Cranchester, it's so near." That's exactly it," cried Caroline triumphantly. "It seems quite clear by now that he didn't get away from here by train. He must simply have walked into Cranchester, and I believe he's there still. No one would dream of his being so near at hand." I pointed out several objections to the theory, but when once Caroline has got something firmly into her head, nothing dislodges it. "And you think Poirot has the same idea," said Miss Gannett thoughtfully. "It's a curious coincidence, but I was out for a walk this afternoon on the Cranchester Road, and he passed me in a car coming from that direction." We all looked at each other. "Why, dear me," said Miss Gannett suddenly, "I'm mahjong all the time and I never noticed it." Caroline's attention was distracted from her own inventive exercises. She pointed out to Miss Gannett that a hand consisting of mixed suits and too many chows was hardly worth going mahjong on. Miss Gannett listened imperturbably and collected her counters. "Yes, dear, I know what you mean," she said. "But it rather depends on what kind of a hand you have to start with, doesn't it?" "You'll never get the big hands if you don't go for them," urged Caroline. "Well, we must all play our own way, mustn't we?" said Miss Gannett. She looked down at her counters. "After all, I'm up so far." Caroline, who was considerably down, said nothing. East wind passed, and we set to once more. Annie brought in the tea things. Caroline and Miss Gannett were both slightly ruffled, as is often the case during one of these festive evenings. "If you would only play a little quicker, dear," said Caroline, as Miss Gannett hesitated over her discard. "The Chinese put down the tiles so quickly, it sounds like little birds pattering." For some few minutes we played like the Chinese. "You haven't contributed much to the sum of information, Shepherd," said Colonel Carter genially. "You're a sly dog. Hand in glove with the great detective, and not a hint as to the way things are going." "James is an extraordinary creature," said Caroline. "He cannot bring himself to part with information." She looked at me with some disfavour. "I assure you," I said, "that I don't know anything. Poirot keeps his own counsel." "Wise man," said the Colonel with a chuckle. "He doesn't give himself away. But they're wonderful fellows, these foreign detectives. Up to all sorts of dodges, I believe." "Pung," said Miss Gannett in a tone of quiet triumph. "And mahjong." The situation became more strained. It was annoyance at Miss Gannett's going mahjong for the third time running, which prompted Caroline to say to me, as we built a fresh wall, "You are too tiresome, James. You sit there like a dead head and say nothing at all." "But my dear," I protested, "I have really nothing to say, that is, of the kind you mean." "Nonsense," said Caroline as she sorted her hand. "You must know something interesting." I did not answer for a moment. I was overwhelmed and intoxicated. I had read of there being such a thing as the perfect winning, going mahjong on one's original hand. I had never hoped to hold the hand myself. With suppressed triumph, I laid my hand face upwards on the table. "As they say in the Shanghai Club," I remarked, "tin ho, the perfect winning." The Colonel's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. "Upon my soul," he said, "what an extraordinary thing. I never saw that happen before." It was then that I went on, goaded by Caroline's gibes and rendered reckless by my triumph. "And as to anything interesting," I said, "what about a gold wedding ring with a date and from Inside, I pass over the scene that followed. I was made to say exactly where this treasure was found. I was made to reveal the date. March 13th, said Caroline. Just 6 months ago. Out of the babel of excited suggestions and suppositions, 3 theories were evolved. 1. That of Colonel Carter, that Ralph was secretly married to Flora. The first or most simple solution. 2. That of Miss Gannett, that Roger Ackroyd had been secretly married to Mrs. Ferrars. 3. That of my sister, that Roger Ackroyd had married his housekeeper, Miss Russell. A 4th or super theory was propounded by Caroline later, as we went up to bed. Mark my words, she said suddenly, I shouldn't be at all surprised if Geoffrey Raymond and Flora weren't married. Surely it would be from G, not from R then, I suggested. You never know. Some girls call men by their surnames. And you heard what Miss Gannett said this evening about Flora's carryings on. Strictly speaking, I had not heard Miss Gannett say anything of the kind, but I respected Caroline's knowledge of innuendos. How about Hector Blunt, I hinted. If it's anybody. Nonsense, said Caroline. I dare say he admires her, may even be in love with her. But depend upon it, a girl isn't going to fall in love with a man old enough to be her father when there's a good-looking young secretary about. She may encourage Major Blunt just as a blind. Girls are very artful. But there's one thing I do tell you, James Shepherd. Flora Ackroyd does not care a penny piece for Ralph Patten, and never has. You can take it from me. I took it from her meekly.